I always double check before we start, um, just so I can feel secure as we're doing this.
We've had enough technical
Yeah,
difficulties that we
no
gotta
kidding.
we gotta ensure.
Yes, and it's working. It's working. It's working. It
Excellent.
says I might have some chats. Let's see. Who's in here? You guys in here? Come on in. Come on into the chat if you'd like to. And we will get going here. We had some technical difficulties, folks, and we fixed them. And I've also learned something about this broadcast. Don't do it on Safari. That's the main issue.
And don't click too many buttons trying to fix it,
Yeah,
or else you'll
exactly.
screw something else up.
Did you happen to see that ad today that was posted on Twitter with the black politician, I believe black Republican with the KKK thing going? Did you
No,
see that?
I haven't seen that. No.
It was fascinating. The gist of it was he's a black Republican running for Congress somewhere. I assume somewhere in the South. I don't know for sure, but he's basically, it was a pro-gun ad, and he was saying a man like him might need an assault rifle when there's a bunch of a bunch of Democratic guys in white hoods coming to kill him, and he says you'll need every round. Fascinating.
Yeah, how the tables have turned.
Yes, I'll say. Andrew's here. Emo Hoppien. What's up, man? Cool. Free. Oh, well, he's a fan already. Okay. Free Private
Excellent.
Cities is my favorite Hoppien. Praxis next to Secession. We'll talk about Secession as well. That's one of my favorites. But now I'm learning about this Free Private City thing. So we've got some listeners, and we'll bring you on in officially now. Alex Voss, welcome to Counterflow Live.
Buck, thanks for having me here. As I was just saying to you, I really am a big fan of yours. Been following you now for 3 or 4 years, and it's great to be here. I'm happy to do it, and nice to meet you.
Well, thanks. That's nice to hear. I'm glad you're a fan, and I'm glad you're on. And Andrew, thank you. I know you're listening out there. Thank you for making the introduction between Alex and myself. So, what you're kind of known for, at least all of a sudden to me from Andrew, and this is one of the things that Andrew, I mean, for him, this is almost like porn. Free private cities. This is the stuff that he talks to us. We have this group chat, and this is kind of his main topic. So, for him, we need no introduction of exactly what this is, but I'll let you introduce yourself first and kind of what you do, and then we'll jump into the weeds here with this free private city thing.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks, Buck. So, my name's Alex Voss, as you mentioned. I am actually the CFO for an organization called Tipolis that's working to build free private cities in the real world. I also serve as a senior advisor to the Free Cities Foundation, which is Tipolis. It's more about trying to share the idea, spread the idea, and get people on board with new types of governance structures. And then Tipolis is more of the project arm. So in that regard, I'm sort of here on behalf of the foundation, trying to spread these ideas and make. Largely, this was a European centered idea. At least in its current form, and I'm really trying to increase knowledge of this over on this side of the Atlantic. And so that's really who I'm here on behalf of.
Is this a thing that's done in European areas then?
So it's not really done in European areas. The idea is more popular there for, I think, two reasons. One is my boss and sort of the popularizer of this concept. His name is Titus Gebel. He's a German entrepreneur, and he actually wrote a book by the same title, Free Private Cities, Making Governments Compete for You. So I think his being over in Europe is part to do with it. And the other part is really, as has become very obvious over the past couple of years, at least here in the US, there are a couple of havens Places escape to not have some of like the COVID tyranny and other. There's really limited in terms of where you can go to escape some of these things, and so I think the European libertarians are a bit more desperate to find something that they can do to not face all of the COVID tyranny and tax tyranny and all that stuff.
Your connection, your audio connection seemed spotty on that last thing right there. I don't know if your Wi-Fi dropped briefly or anything, but I don't know. Maybe it's better. More technical difficulties.
Yeah, of course. It looks like I got a 9 out of 10 or an 8 out of 10. It's fluctuating.
It's doing the like a robot voice kind of through your mic. Check the mic settings or the old boomer fix on switch mics, switch back to mic, that kind of thing. Restart it. That's all. That always works.
Yeah. Let's see. Test, test, test.
It's still pretty digitalized. Or
Let me see about the old.
Mm, yeah, Control Alt Delete exactly. Carlos, what's up?
Alrighty, test, test. Still digitalized.
Just a touch. It's actually, I think, better.
Well,
Oh, Andrew says kill some windows. You got extra windows open?
probably. Let me go. Let me exit out of some of these.
Yeah.
All right, that's a bunch.
What's up, Joshua? Welcome to the chat.
Am I doing any better here?
It's still a touch staticky.
Let me see what else I can get rid of.
Although it does sound like it's maybe getting better.
Too many things open here. All right, I've gotten rid of just about everything. Does that seem any better?
No. Can you try the AirPod mics maybe again? Sorry, dude.
Yeah, no problem.
The audio gods don't want his ideas out here.
Yes.
Try that. Try it again.
How does this sound? How
Dang,
does this
that's
sound
even
now?
that's worse. That's even worse. Sorry, man. Turn Wi-Fi off on your phone, says our boy Emo. That's always
Wi-Fi's off on my phone. How does it sound with no mic or no headphones at all?
still staticky.
Okay.
Maybe yeah. Okay, Andrew. I mean Andrew. Alex, can you exit out and then come back in the studio? We'll let you back in.
Yep.
I'll entertain everyone while you're gone. All right, let's talk. Should we talk shit about Alex Voss? Yeah, turn off that anti-tax porn. Andrew, he had your stuff up there. I know. Well, the mic swap kind of worked, but he needs a more legit mic, which he says is sitting in his Amazon uh, box or whatever you want to call it, his shopping cart, ready to purchase. He needs one of these bad boys. Take it off. You take it off. It makes sense that Donnie Gebert would be in here with this privatization. Let's see if you guys have some cross pollination of ideas. If there's some crossover between stuff you write about. Donnie, were you familiar with Alex Voss? Are you familiar with him? Yeah, I hope it goes viral. I, I hope it goes viral. I hope first we can hear him though. Oop, there he is in my little chat. Let's welcome him back once again.
All right, let's see how it works.
Hey, that sounds better already.
All right, let's see about these.
All right.
Test, test, test. How's that sound?
Alex, it's sounding much better.
You know what the solution is. You already know it. Don't use Safari.
Were you using Safari?
I was on Safari and I just now got out and went to Chrome, and it's
Yep.
better.
Much better. Much better. Awesome. Cool. I'm excited. Now we got people in here. I thoroughly entertained them while you were gone.
I
I won't say
appreciate
what we
that.
I won't say what we talked about. Um, but to pick back up to where we were, you said it was a European idea, Eurocentric, I suppose, but that's because the kind of the creator of the founder of this whole thing that we're talking about is in Europe, so that would make sense. Plus, their what let's say the COVID tyranny over there was slightly worse than it is here, and you live in or around, excuse me, Chicago. So for you to say Europe is worse, dang, I mean, it was pretty
Yeah.
bad.
Well, I don't. I mean, I'm not sure that it's worse than Chicago. Chicago was pretty bad, but at least here in the U.S., you
Yeah.
could move to Florida, and believe me, it's I'm working on it.
Yes.
There are
The good thing
extremely
about
restrictive
Chicago,
measures.
the good thing about Chicago is your mayor at least was able to get her hair done because she looks good, right?
I'm not certain. I think she looks good, but at least she got her hair done. She is the face of Chicago, so thank goodness for
Mhm. Yes, I liked her in Return of the Jedi. No, I'm kidding. Okay, let's get into this free private cities thing. So first, when someone hears this, maybe free private cities, it sounds like free as in free of cost, which it is not, I believe. You're talking about free as in freedom, liberty, that type of thing, correct?
Exactly. Yeah. So the idea, the free really comes from I would say again, it's because it's a European version. I think in the U.S. we focus a bit more on the word liberty. In Europe, freedom is a bit more core to what the libertarians would promote, and so that's really the key to that word. And the other idea behind it is that being a city with a for-profit operator behind it, you'll actually have a contract with each citizen. So what this does is make sure that you're free to do whatever you'd like to do outside of this contract that you have with the governance provider. So I think that's really what it's trying to hit home at.
Yeah, there's something when this is going to get a little bit obscure to some listeners, but when I would read Hans Hermann Hoppe and he's talking about covenant societies and these small, basically like as he says, 10,000 Liechtensteins. Some people think, well, libertarians they want these small private cities. That means anything goes, and it's just libertinism everywhere. And it really doesn't to a lot of people. It actually can be more constricting as far as certain behaviors go. Can you talk about that aspect of this? Because I assume that if there were a lot of these, you could find various ones. It'd be like, puzzle pieces, and sometimes there's craziness, sometimes there's holiness, if you will. But
Mhm.
talk about that aspect.
Yeah, no, I think that you're hitting the nail on the head. I mean, part of the aspect of being small is so that there can be many of them all across the world and various different styles and structures, and you could have we like to use the Israeli kibbutz style free private city, which is sort of a contradiction in terms, but if someone wants to do it, as far as I'm concerned, go ahead. But as far as we see free private cities, it's not free as in libertinism at all. It's free as in this is your contract that you voluntarily entered into. We as governance provider voluntarily entered into. If you don't like it, fine, but you entered into it voluntarily. And so, to that regard, if we feel that you are, in some way a nuisance to the city, or you're hurting our ability to attract new customers, absolutely you could be removed. It's not beyond question. In fact, I'd say as we think about marketing a free private city, we're not really marketing to libertarians per se. I mean, they're certainly the most interested. Those in the Bitcoiners are the most interested, but we're trying to provide a regular city for normal people to do normal stuff, to go about their day, do their job, not bicker over, politics constantly. So the idea isn't to create some haven where you can do whatever you want in your front yard. It's to make a society where there's more peaceful interaction between people.
How would this idea compare to, let's say, like a homeowners association or something for a large neighborhood?
Yeah, I would say it's quite similar, with one key distinction. There might be others, but at least one key distinction. So, with a free private city, really the goal is to have complete autonomy from any host nation or state or county. Really, the only provider of governance services in a true free private city is the one governance provider. In a homeowners association, you do have a lot of rules and regulations. You have to follow this. You can't build a barn in your backyard. It has to be painted XYZ colors, those types of things. But you're also still subject to, your local county, your state taxes if you have them, and then the IRS, of course, is going to still come knocking. No matter how robust or not your homeowners association is. So it really is trying to make it the one and only provider of governance services rather than just another layer.
Completely autonomous then.
I mean, that's the ideal version. I would have to say we aren't there yet.
Uh-huh.
It's not an easy sell to just ask for complete autonomy. As you can imagine, most people don't say yes to that.
Yeah.
So we try to be a bit more open. It's partly why our foundation has gone from being the Free Private Cities Foundation to the Free Cities Foundation. We'd like to have a little bit more room to operate and really develop, I guess, intentional communities on the one hand, and then halfway between intentional communities and free private cities are what we call prosperity zones.
Yeah.
And whereas more or less, we have to have a relationship with a host government. We'd probably pay them a portion of our net profits, on a yearly basis or something, and they would say, you're still subject to our foreign policy, for example, but anything inside the zone could be, largely of the domain of the free private of the governance operator. So it's sort of halfway between there. Anything internally focused is entirely within our own, autonomy, and anything outwardly focused is, more or less still under the jurisdiction of the host nation.
This kind of has a feel of the type of thing that in, let's say, I don't know, 30 years, I could look back and watch this video and laugh at how this wasn't a thing in 2022. And it's like, look at me back in the day talking about something that we all experience now as a regular part of life, and plenty of options to do this to. Just my own thoughts. And Andrew in the chat earlier said this is kind of the wave of the future. It seems like one of those things. There was a time when you would have laughed at the thought of a hybrid car, hybrid electric, and then electric straight up, and you plug this electricity at Whole Foods while your car, not and I'm not promoting that kind of thing, but I'm just saying there's so many ideas that just 20 years ago seemed crazy, including
Absolutely.
locking down because of a mild flu virus and being forced to take shots. But I digress. So it does sound, as you describe it, though, hard to crack into an American city to do this type of thing at the moment. Would you agree with that?
I would. I would say, just a bit of a backdrop on where we operate. It's largely in third that are taking our calls at this time. Largely, they're groups that really need to attract foreign investment. Half of their budget is from World Bank grants and things like that. So, they're really hurting with the COVID lockdowns in particular over the last couple of years, and they need to find some way to attract people to come into their country and invest in their country and develop things in their country. The United States is simply not at that stage right now. I know it feels desperate. And I have to say I concur with that assessment that it is desperate, and things are going massively wrong in just about every way here in the U.S. But we still got the money printer, and amazingly, people still value U.S. dollars. So as long as that goes on, the U.S. Joe Biden's not taking my call to develop a free private city. And to the extent we tried to build one sort of bottom up, I think that there's some merit to that, and there are definitely ways we can do margin. But if you came out full stop and tried to do it, my guess is that you wouldn't last long. So you got to be careful and strategic about how you're doing this in the U.S. and largely in Western Europe as well. But that's still a lot of countries around the world for us to in.
You cut out just a bit there, but hopefully you can still hear me. Um, my friend Carlos in the chat, you can see this too. This is a good question. Basically, he's saying with some of the electric car technology, the oil special interests kind of try to limit the availability or whatever. They try to hamper the electric car industry. Do you think there's a special interest that wants to keep your private city idea squashed? I mean, I can think of several if you're talking about the United States of America, but more broadly, is there special interest groups that would try to kill this idea?
I'm sure that there are. I think it's in general, governments are just not in the business of giving up territory or giving up sovereignty or autonomy. And then the other is just really it is in it's somewhat less so in the U.S. in my perception, but in Europe and in some of these third world countries, there really is a spirit of, hey, they're just trying to implement neo-colonialism. Everything private equals bad. That type of sentiment. It's not particularly well thought through, but it does seem to exist. And in some of our projects, we've certainly been hit with that type of criticism. For example, one of our projects in Honduras is accused of expropriating land from private individuals, which is, certainly not something that we stand for. Any land that's part of this project was bought totally on the open market without any type of, government influence in the first place. And it's actually in the charter of this particular project not to end that they won't accept any expropriation of land. And the reason why it's even possible to do this in the first place is because when the Constitution was changed, the government of Honduras wanted to keep the idea that it's possible to expropriate land in the Constitution change in case they ever needed it in the future. I would say it's if you want to give them the benefit of the doubt, it's misconceptions.
Mm-hmm.
In a lot of ways, it's misconceptions. It's deliberate, but
yeah. That's what a lot of things I'm interested in. I've noticed. So you said Honduras. Where is this idea taking place at the moment? I know it's a very limited amount of spots, but talk about that.
Sure. Yeah, I'd say Honduras is remarkably the most the furthest along of any of these projects, and unfortunately, and I'll get into it in a little bit, they've taken a bit of a setback recently. So in, I would say, 2013 or 2014, Honduras actually passed a law and changed the constitution to allow what they call REDs, RED, which is some sort of prosperity zone, like we've been talking about, that had very significant levels of autonomy. And this was really under the influence of American economist Paul Romer and his idea of charter cities. That law was deemed unconstitutional for basically granting up too much autonomy. And so after a number of years, a bunch of lawyers and investors and entrepreneurs, including my boss, Tita Skevel, worked in Honduras to pass a law that was quite similar, but had a few changes to it. And these ones they called the ZEDEs, the Zones for Economic Development and Employment. under this new law and the changed constitution, you're allowed to set up what I guess I would describe public-private partnership, where largely the autonomy within the zone is outside of the zone is not so much absolute. Civil law is the domain of the city operator, so the for-profit, promoter, and criminal law, while it is still Honduran criminal law, is enforced by the private police of the city operator. So as you can imagine, enforcement is, 9/10 of what the criminal law is in the first place, and
Yeah.
Honduran police are not allowed to enter, unless they have explicit permission on that particular case. So in a lot of ways, there's significant autonomy. This changing of the law allowed so far 3 applications to be approved to create these ZAs. One is Honduras Prospera. It's probably the most well-known of the projects. It's, I would say it's really marketing itself towards a North American libertarian audience. A lot of ways they have very idealistic views, and I don't say that in any way as a negative, but more as a description. To create, more or less an entirely new arbitration system. It's and so they're really a phenomenal group. They were the first one passed, and they're the ones that everyone's heard of. There are, in fact, 2 other projects. One is Ciudad Morazan, which is in it is in the industrial town of Choloma, right in the heart of Honduras. And this one is entirely towards local Hondurans that want to have a safe place to work and live and not be harassed by gang warfare and the drug trade and things like that. It's also idealistic in terms of wanting to provide private governance, almost completely independent from the Honduran state, but it's marketed to a different audience, and it's not trying to create, a blockchain based, trading. It's a bit more, it's a bit accomplish. And then the third project, which we're not terribly familiar, more or less a farming plant in the south of the country. It's called Orquídea, and they're not so innovative on the governance front. I think it's more of a play for them to reduce their taxes and a little bit of regulation, things like that. But I'd say that the 2 really interesting projects are Ciudad Morazan and Honduras Prospera. Now, unfortunately, what's happened is the ZAs have been very controversial in Honduras, largely, again, because of the either naivete of the population or, misrepresentations. But for whatever reason, they're not. And they're wanting to abolish them. In fact, who was elected in October or November of last year is the socialist president, and she ran on a platform of, I want to say, 21 or 23, her 23-point plan, and one of which was abolish the ZAs. So that president was elected, and it does seem like she is intent on, in some way, shape, or form, limiting what the ZAs can do. She can't legally get rid of them entirely. She can make it very difficult on them, and she can make it very difficult or not possible to get new ones passed. But it's going to be very difficult for her to get rid of what already exists. We'll see. I'm not privy to all of the information, and what I am, unfortunately, I can't really share more about right now, but we'll see how that plays out. There's a lot of really good legal protections for the ZAs with international treaties and investor protection treaties and things like that. But at the end of the day, as we all know, the Honduran government has the guns and the tanks, and we'll see. So
Right.
it really is a test right now, over the next, I would say, year or so to see, what kind of staying power you can get with these things. Because at the end of the day, until you're willing to fight for that independence or that autonomy, you're going to have to be, hopeful that someone will allow you.
Yeah, it's still the system. We talk about this a lot in some of my circles is c- circulation of the elites, and you still need elites at some point to back something like this. Otherwise, you are kind of at the mercy of the other elites. Yeah.
Hmm.
Okay.
I think that's exactly right. You need groups across the socioeconomic spectrum to support the project, but in particular, the elites have to get behind something like this in order to ensure that force isn't used to just destroy something very, very quickly. I think that's exactly right.
Yeah.
It's all nice and good, and in fact, we'd like sort of within our city to be more or less what we all expect as good libertarians. You just interact peacefully with each other.
Right.
But from an outside world perspective, the fact of the matter is the rest of the world doesn't operate that way,
Yep.
and we need to be cognizant of that in order to lose any autonomy or freedom that we are able to gain.
Yeah, you don't want end up like the privatized city of the Branch Davidians in Waco, and I don't want to make light of that. That's
Yeah.
that's kind of the truth. Um, Carlos said in the chat earlier, and this sounds kind of like what you're saying. The trick might be to pass legislation on the download to allow these zones, then get in strong, ready to move and grandfather in a bunch of the areas before the government over the top can remove it. It sounds like maybe that's what happened, and then that socialist president won, but there's some protections there because of what they did earlier.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I mean, you don't. I mean, I'm a little bit hesitant to use the word Trojan horse, but in some ways that is true. I mean, you have to pass these laws when people don't necessarily fully understand everything behind it, because there's just not the political constituency in almost any country in order to do this. What I can say in terms of Honduras is that people were more or less aware of the autonomy that the Zetes were giving up. It's part of why they were so controversial. But one of the things that's made it pretty robust is there's an international treaty between Honduras and the country of Kuwait. And in that treaty, Kuwait specifically mentions uh, the Zetes as being a place where if Kuwait or people in Kuwait are willing to make investments into Honduras, they need to be assured that the Zetes are going to be around or that they're not just going to be stolen by the Honduran government at a moment's notice. And so they're put into an international treaty between Kuwait and Honduras, which now means that if certain things are violated, it would go to the International Criminal Court in The Hague, Netherlands, and be decided there. And everyone,
Okay.
I'm as much as the next guy skeptical of some international body coming to the defense of the innocent small guy. But I do think that there's some merit to somewhat less forceful or smaller countries. They do have to be subject to these courts. The U.S. is going to punt 1,000 miles on a ruling from the International Criminal Court, but Honduras can't because they
Yeah.
still have to interact in the world where they're not the superpower.
Right. Right. Do you I mean, as you're saying, kinda laying some of these details out, I mean, I live in a small town of 13,000 people. I'm kind of pretending in my mind this is something that could work here. Do you see it at all a possibility in a small American town, almost sneaking through, like you said, kind of before people realize what's going on? Is there a way to kinda do that at the ground level where it's kind of quietly below the surface? Asking for a
I
friend.
I I really wish I could say that the answer is yes. I'm not sure what the answer is. I know Andrew has great ideas for this, and certainly we've been in communication with him about how we can do something like this. There are absolutely on the margin things that can be done to, um, from the ground up, really implement these things. I would say it's just like you said, though. You have to sort of do it under the radar before it gets anywhere. And most likely, the local level is the first step. Uh, being in a friendly state might be an opportunity. Even heard, I can't verify this, but I've heard that there's some merit to if two states had some sort of treaty between them, you could make private cities. I don't. I'd have to look into that more, but you could certainly see a case in an empowered DeSantis
Yeah.
coming out of the COVID crisis with I forget who it is that's running. You've even had on your show there in Texas, but
Yeah.
pretty open to these types of ideas. You could see something like that happening. So would I rule it out? No. Would I would also tell you though that our organization is not looking to the U.S. as sort of core investment spots. It's got to be a more of an organic, bottom up type of thing.
Okay. Well, let's get into some of the, I guess, the framework of let's this theoretical free private city. You don't even have to use the ones that are existing now, unless you want to in Honduras. This can be anywhere, but here apparently. But let's kind of from the ground up explain what we see, what the framework looks like of one of these free private cities, and as you'd like to see it, basically as the end goal.
Sure, sure. Um, I would say, I won't use one of the specific examples because they do all vary a good amount. Just what is politically possible to pass in terms of legislation. There's a number of factors. So, sort of generalities, what we'd like to see. The idea is, and I'll go with a prosperity zone example because that's actually what we're working on and something that I do think is very much feasible in the next couple of years. So in this case, what we're looking at is probably a third world country. We're looking at a group that needs a country that needs investment, and they're willing to pass some sort of law that more or less, we have like kind of 10 points or 10 questions that we ask governments to respond to. And if they're able to give us, call it 7 or 8 of these really important autonomous points, then we're willing to sort of go the next step and have these conversations. So as long as we can get some of those important levels of autonomy, then what we'd do is we'd work with their government to pass some sort of law, potentially change the constitution, although that adds pretty significant uncertainty and difficulty to any project. Although if you do get it passed, it obviously helps. Once that law is passed, then our company would come and we would say, look, we want to buy this property, this big plot of land, and we'd like to operate this plot of land as one of these prosperity zones. And we'd work up a contract then between us and the host government, and it would likely be the company that was going to develop this would likely be in a country that has an investor protection treaty with our host country. So in the case of Honduras, a lot of the promote U.S. based companies. And that's partly because the U.S. flexes its muscles. Treaties that are in place, and so once that contract between city operator and host government is in place, we would actually go out and buy real land that no one is on, basically uninhabited land, and it has no infrastructure, and we'd have to build from the bottom up the infrastructure for the full city. And this is, it's its own interesting question and how to do that. It's we're largely market oriented people, and so the idea of how a city develops organically over time is quite enticing. But at the same time, if this is to be any type of short-term solution, we need to fast track, how some of these cities have developed over millenniums. So we'll buy a plot of land, call it 500 acres, 200 hectares, about the size of Monaco would be a good reference for people. And we'd have to build the infrastructure for it and then start marketing for people to move there. As the city operator, we would implement obviously the infrastructure so people have a place to eat and sleep and go to the bathroom and things like that. They'd have internet. We'd also have to have a dispute resolution system, which is vital to having, a relatively autonomous zone. And the reason why is probably no surprise to you all, but if you're going to the host government for how to resolve disputes, they're going to side with whatever they think is, their their view of morality, which is obviously quite different from ours. You need to have some sort of dispute resolution that's in of the state, but at the same time, if you're a resident in one of these cities, you don't want us, the city operator, to also be running the resolution system. And so there has to be some sort of mechanism outside that's an independent dispute resolution system where they're actually to find what's the right outcome. They'll hold the city operator accountable if we have an egregious violation of the contract, and they'll also side with us if the resident is being outrageous and ruining our business case. And so we needed to kick someone out, then they'll side with us. And so, that's one big portion of it. And then I'd say one of the last key functions of a free private city is really this idea of a residence contract. And this is a real contract. I know this is sort of a joke in libertarianism that we all have this, hypothetical social contract. We think that it's important to have a real contract for a couple of reasons. One, it actually lays out, your rights and your responsibilities, our rights and our responsibilities. Obviously, that's extremely important. The other piece of it that's very important is that it gets rid of any forum for which people can bicker or dispute things. So the Constitution is sort of the generic citizens contract for all of us in the U.S. But because it's this public document, we all can fight about, well, the Second Amendment is absolute. Well, the founding fathers didn't know that we were going to have nukes and things like that. It creates this real forum for us to argue about it and then ultimately impose ourselves on someone else. If you have an explicit contract between, say you and me as city operator, you can dispute what's in that contract, but it has no relevance for anyone else. You could say, well, I thought it wasn't too much of a nuisance to play music at 10 p.m. on a Friday. And then we'd have to figure out whether that is or is not acceptable. But that says nothing about whether, someone else down has the same right. It's a very individualized experience. And so it gets, having these places where people can, argue, because they'll always argue about something.
Let me ask you this. I'm a firefighter, and while, I do think it's possible to envision a privatized fire department, like I can theorize this and picture possibly how it would work. I will also say, maybe I'm biased, but I do know the ins and outs of how it works. That is a governmental function that seems to work fairly efficiently as it stands. What would fire protection look like in your ideal private city?
Sure. I think you're right. There are some services, and firefighting might be one of them, that are so-called public goods. And I'm not necessarily one to quibble with the words exactly, but I think that that's failing to look at property rights in the right way. In our current paradigm, that's true. Perhaps Lockhart needs, a public fire department. I'm totally willing to buy that might be the case. In a private city, though, that's under the purview of the city operator. So by definition, it will be privatized. Now, if we don't have one, perhaps people won't move to the city. Right. If we can sell the fire department and they can figure out how to make a profit on their own, we'll try to do that. And maybe we'll have, competing services to try to do that. If it truly is a service that can't be provided and make a profit on its own, and maybe that's true, well, that might be something that we have to serve anyway. And it's part of our sort of operating costs of the city. And we'd have to charge, governance services high enough that we could make a profit above, the firefighting and the other infrastructure that we have to provide. So I think that it's just, it totally is hard to imagine in our current paradigm. But if you're
Yeah.
thinking about this private governance provider, I mean, it's got to be provided one way or another. And if it isn't, then people won't move there.
Yeah, and there's contracts available for public fire departments to come into other areas. A lot of people probably wouldn't know this, but in Austin, for instance, UT, it's the biggest university campus in the states. They don't pay the city of Austin for fire protection. However, they get it. So
Yep.
it's just this, but they have their own little private deal, but they kind of contract through. It's a weird, muddy system unless you kind of look through and read every detail. But there are examples of where there's basically mutual aid agreements and things like that. Anyway, on to the next subject. I know you're going to get this pushback when you tell normal people, NPCs or something about an idea like this. You probably get basically the same one or two common push items that are pushed back on. Hey, well, what about XYZ? What are those common pushbacks that you hear? One has to be poor people, I assume.
Yeah, I would say it's poor people. Um, what's the other? There's another big one that just slipped my brain. So with poor people, I guess we'll start there. Yeah, the idea is, well, are these just enclaves for rich libertarians or
Yeah.
rich Bitcoiners to
Yes.
go and not pay taxes on their Bitcoin gains?
Yeah.
And the answer is, it is that, but it is also more.
The
Um,
answer is yes, indeed.
and to be clear, I have absolutely no problem with it being used for those purposes.
Right.
Um, I would also, in a current project, in Honduras in particular, one of the easiest people that we can get to move to a city like this is, local. We're trying to market to people that we can fill up a city and have an actual community wants to move somewhere until people are there. And so there's a little bit of a chicken and egg, and oftentimes the full socioeconomic spectrum has to be included for people to want to move. I would say that's one. Two, there are all kinds of jobs and things that need to happen in a city. So,
Yeah.
there's certainly, roles for everyone, or people that want to work and people that don't want to work, and people that want to work all kinds of different jobs. Um, and I would also say, look, if we're building a private city or a prosperity zone, we're not taxing, we're charging a fee for governance service. No one's going to move to a city and pay a fee for governance service if the fee is exorbitantly high. And so, we have to set that fee low enough that we're enticing for people to move. And it's often well within I mean, certainly within the Western world's poor could afford a fee like this. I mean, we're talking $2,000 or $3,000 a year.
Yeah.
That's something almost, unless you're a degenerate, in which case we don't really want you anyway. That's something that's probably more affordable than your current tax bill.
Right.
Um,
Yeah, a
so
lot more.
I think it exactly. So I don't think that that's true at all. And then certainly, the final bit that I would add is that what we're trying to do is not just lower taxes and fees, but we're trying to create a better regulatory system as well, so that if you are poor but you have a good business idea or good motivation, please do come into our zone and set up a business. I mean, we want everyone in the zone to be rich, but not because they came in rich, but because the zone is working the way that it should, and you're getting good governance, and it's creating wealth the way that America basically created wealth in the first century of it being here.
Mhm.
Allowing
Mhm.
people to do things and build and grow and start businesses, and that's more or less why we have the wealth we have now. It's not from anything we've done recently.
Right, right. Uh, my friend Donnie in the chat brings up a good. This has to get asked a lot. Currencies. Can you discuss the currency? Your thoughts on what money would be exchanged?
Sure. The short answer is anything that you want. We're not going to have legal tender laws necessarily in a hypothetical perfect world. frequently with these, the host government does want us to use their local currency, at least as one of the options. So typically we have to do at least that. I would say, in the Honduras case, um, if we're talking about what can you pay anyone else privately for any other good or service, anything you want. We have absolutely no view into that. Whatever you can mutually agree with people. As far as what can we accept in terms of you paying your resident fees to us, I think will be probably reasonable in the short run. It's probably, if we're in Honduras, we're probably talking the U.S. dollar. We're probably talking Bitcoin. We're probably talking gold. So one of those three answers would probably be what we'd stick with, because we don't want, your crappy Honduran lempiras either. We really don't want your dollars, but we have to operate in the world right now, and a lot of people do, so we have expenses in dollars. If we're talking over in, Africa or Asia, it might be, I guess in Africa, it might be more of like a euro or a dollar or gold. And then in Asia, it might be, I don't know, a Singaporean dollar or something like that. But, probably two or three different options, and we won't be totally strict with it, at least until there's a clear future monetary standard, which it's not very clear to me at current times what that will be.
One of the worst, one of the worst trends, I suppose, that's happened in this country for many decades now is this kind of illusion of a free market. But people like yourself and me and a lot of people in the chat here understand this is not a free market. We understand what the Federal Reserve, what they do, and lobbyists and all of these NGOs. There's so many hands in the pot here that in this country, but a lot of normies will look at companies like BlackRock, who just buy up all of this land here in the States in all these neighborhoods, and they don't want people to own anything, as we've heard, and they want you to like that. And so you're renting, and that's the future that people see, and that's unfortunately what's happening here. And people like Bill Gates buying up millions of acres of land, and some normal person is going to hear those news stories and go, and then maybe hear this and go, well, this sounds just like that free market stuff that BlackRock and Bill Gates are doing in the United States. What's the difference between this and that kind of crap?
Yeah, so pretty much everything.
Right.
I would say in terms of a free private city, now there are multiple models. I mean, Ciudad Morazan, one of the Honduran projects that I mentioned earlier, they actually will go with this sort of what do they call it? A proprietary city is what they've called it, and what that means is that the owner and operator of the city will own all of the land and only lease out to businesses um, or residents that would like to live in one of the apartments or houses. So, I mean, that is an option in some cases. I would say it's still different because it's, one small city where you voluntarily have to move to. If BlackRock and Bill Gates buy up all of the land, you got to live somewhere. So,
Yeah. Right.
and then obviously philosophically it's different, but that doesn't provide as much assurance to someone because that could change over time. So the other response is that within a free private city, we would sell. Our current is absolutely to sell land and really rent some. We'll probably sell some, and depends on what the consumers really want. Part of the business model, and I would say, about half of the business model is making profits from providing governance services and collecting the fee. And about half of the business model is buying land in some third world country at really low prices, investing in infrastructure or governance services, attracting a big population and selling it in X what you bought it. So absolutely, and that's part of our profit incentive, is to make it all nice and then to sell it to you to come live there. And frankly, we'd like to sell it to people in a lot of cases who are going to come in and develop it further and make it even more attractive and further drive up real estate. So I would say absolutely we're open to selling real estate and letting people have permanent ownership over their property, especially one where we won't have a real estate tax each year.
Are you familiar with Curtis Yarvin?
Uh, Certainly, I've heard of him and I've heard him on some podcasts, but I can't say that I'm a big reader. Uh,
Okay. This question is going to incorporate some of his the stuff that he writes about. Is this almost? Let me ask it this way: who would run these private cities? Is it one person?
well, I'd say it's probably a company. Our company is I'd say we have quasi competitors, but we're really the most direct in this domain. I guess you could think about it in terms of current like special economic zone operators. There are companies that are good at providing the administration for those in a very efficient manner. There are 5,000 special economic zones all across the world. We're trying to take special economic zones to 10 times higher into a full city, and so I think there will be companies most likely that operate these. I mean, I guess you could have a single entrepreneur who's pretty wealthy that sets up a company and wants to run these cities, but they're pretty big projects, so it takes a lot of capital in order to do this. And so my guess is that it'll be one to five entrepreneurs that form a company together. They raise capital from call it 15 to 20 investors at first and start the initial levels of development of these things, and ultimately by the end of actually developing a city that could cost $500 million in terms of capex just to get the city to be a sort of functional modern city. I think we're talking they could be private companies certainly, and I think we'd like to remain private because of exactly the reasons that you've outlined earlier with BlackRock. But I think we're talking pretty big companies, not likely to be the one man band LLC
Hmm.
doing it. I mean,
And not,
it's just a speculation. It could be whatever pans out in the market, but that's just how I see it.
I assume you don't envision like a stakeholder capital type environment where there's like a bureaucracy that it's voted on by the stakeholders and all of this kind of thing.
No, not at all. We as the operator need to have complete control over the city because
Yeah.
we can't have you ruining the both the living situation for our clients as well as the profit then for us.
Right. Yeah.
One question I saw come by, and I think it was Andrew that mentioned it. And he was trying to get me to comment on it, and I think it's a good one. Um, is the zone safe? And you're going to these third world countries, that is one of the key pushbacks we get, particularly when Honduras is one of the early promoters of these types of projects. And the answer is, it depends. I would say, you have to pick your location wisely because of that. You do need to provide protection yourself. That's one of the sort of cost business that you'll have to consider. So in Honduras, flying under the radar can be important, but also having good important. The Prospera folks have picked a pretty strong location, being than anything like a Caribbean island and not really part of Honduras. And so I think they're pretty safe. That'd be like you build a private city in Barbados. Is there petty theft and crime? Sure, it's not really Honduras in terms of crime like you might think. The other ones, they do have a significant security, and I think that's something that they have to think through in terms of their business model. One of the ways that they've thought about this is through having firearm ownership is a bit tricky in Honduras in terms of what you're allowed to do based on from the Honduran government. But the city operator is allowed to have a pretty robust armory. And so if you're providing a very strong service and you're keep safe and you're providing them a great place to do business and work, largely, you're looking at your clients and your residents as your defense force. And I think it is true, as much as we don't want to admit it, but people will defend their home and fight for their home more than they will partly why the U.S. foreign policy failures of forever, and there's a lot of reasons for that, but I think that's one way to think about it. I would say the other fact of the matter is we have to be strategic about where we're choosing our locations. We do have one project coming up in Africa. It's quite a safe country in Africa, I will say, and so we've certainly considered that, and I would say it's part of the entrepreneurial calculation and risk taking. Figure out what is not safe enough, or how can we provide a surety that people are going to be safe, because they're not going to move, especially maybe libertarians if they can hold a rifle walking around, but regular people that just want to go about their normal day, they're not moving their wife and kids unless they can be pretty sure they're going to be safe.
You don't have to name names, but are there any locations in Central or South America that are on the radar of places that you might have a new one of these kind of spring up?
More or less all of well, not all, but 80% of the countries there have a lot of what I would call the sort of foundation, in terms of they're struggling financially. They're open to these at least some people in these countries are open to these sort of ideas. And we've certainly had some intros to some governments in all over the world, really. Some in Central and South America, I would say, even some in Europe, which it's pretty difficult to do work in Europe as well. But we do have ongoing discussions with I would say 5 or 6 different countries, all at different stages. Some more promising, some just very fledgling. But yes, absolutely. And to the extent that anyone listening to this is in a country that thinks that there'd be a good reason to look at a project in that country, we're certainly, our doors open. We'd be happy to discuss it and pursue it further.
Just in this chat, I've seen multiple references to it, and you must hear this a lot, to the Amish. What the Amish, what they do here? I mean, a lot of us aren't even completely familiar with how they run things, but it appears to be at least appealing from the outside. How does what they do compare to what you're thinking about?
Yeah, I'd say what the Amish have is a sort of a really expansive and really impressive intentional community. So earlier when we were talking about, on the one end, you have free private cities, which is basically complete. On the other end, it's intentional communities, which don't really have um, certain rules, and you can have a lot of autonomy in a local jurisdiction, even if you still are technically subject to a government jurisdiction. It's sort of a nullification by just de facto. This is how it is. We've certainly seen that. Go ahead.
American Indians, to an extent, too, seem to have this.
They do seem to have. They do seem to have it. I know Indian reservations. There's been some interesting projects. In particular, one. I think it's the Catawba Free Zone in I want to say South Carolina, where they're trying to do a lot in terms of currencies and fintech, that type of stuff. It's a free private city, but it's you're certain you're going in the right direction by fish and Indian reservations. And the whole idea is really, it's partly you have actual different laws and rules that you're subject to, and partly it's just, look, this is my community, and this is how things go here. Unless you're going to send in the feds to enforce this to go exactly the way you want, then it's going to go our way. And we've seen this in a couple different places. One in particular in Honduras. There's an island near Roatan, a much smaller island. This community just got electricity 2 years ago. I was there, a couple months after they got it, trying to figure out, would it make sense to build a free private city here, because you already sort of operate autonomously. And our response to it really became pretty clear that the answer was no. They're already operating as a sort of de facto private city. There's village elders and important ruling families, and what they decide is more or less how the court system adjudicates issues, local issues. And some foreign company trying to build a private city there would suffer the exact same issues that the Honduran government does. They don't
Hmm.
care.
Right,
They're not
right.
going to listen to us. They're going to do it how they want to do it, and that's fine. Let them do it how they want to do it. So I would say the Amish are sort of a light version of that.
Right. Here to me in America, the state of Florida has almost performed a de facto secession. It's maybe a soft secession, as my friend Jeff Deist calls it. What's your thoughts on back to here in America secession and any possibility of that in the future versus kind of what we're talking about with the free private cities?
Yeah, I'm not sure I have anything particularly enlightening to say on this topic. I certainly support secession. I think Jeff and yourself and a few others have been instrumental in my thinking about this. I support in all cases the decentralization. It's become very clear. I come from a relatively conservative background, and it's sort of the same issues. But those crazy Californians are going to ruin everything if we let them go on their own. And it's become very clear to me that over the past 4 or 5 years, so what? let it happen then. We can't keep controlling people that we don't like how they do things. They're just going to do them. So I'd say I certainly support it and would like to work towards it. I would say in my mind I've thought over the years about how is there something that free private cities can do with the 10th Amendment Center,
Hmm.
to try to promote this. I can't say I've come up with any, brilliant, uh, you know, bullets, but, it certainly has crossed my mind. And I think it's important that we support it. It's more or less the big picture mission of free private cities is, partly we want to make a profit and we want to build private governance structures, and that's all true. But the other half of it is that we'd really like to open the eyes to the world that there are alternative versions of governance, and just letting people okay, even if you think it's stupid, we got to let people try different things. And like I said earlier, we're okay with a kibbutz style free private city, and if we're okay with that, then we ought to be okay with democratic socialist
Yeah.
California.
Right. Yeah, indeed. Is there any crossover between what you guys do and the Free State Project? Is there communication amongst either of those groups?
I would say there's some communication, and in some ways, I guess we're modestly competitive with each other, not in the sense that we're either one's rooting against the other one. In fact, I haven't moved to New Hampshire, as you know. So I didn't put my money where my mouth is, but I support their project if they think they can solve something. I really am. I'm supportive of all strategies towards liberty. I'm not really taking sides on them. This is just one new alternative that we'd like to open the prospect to the world. And I think I do think there's some truth to the fact that because the U.S. has been empire for so long, when the tide turns, it's going to be very slow, maybe the last to really see that. It's going to hang on to tyranny as long as it can. I don't know. It's not that I think that other countries are necessarily, silver bullets and they're going to solve everything for us, but I'd like to have a number of different escape hatches, I guess.
Do you see things here in the States getting worse before they get better?
I think so. I do think so. I'm pretty concerned about the future of the country. I think we're printing money, and it's pretty clear that either we're raising rates now, in which case we're already bankrupt, or we're going to go back into QE infinity, and the inflation has just gotten started. I think that's a huge issue, and I am honestly concerned about the mental health of the average American
Yeah,
from
I'll say.
from two things. I mean, obviously the lockdowns is extremely unacceptable, and kills the mental health of so many people, but also just seeing these people, and in the kindest way, uh, not normal. That different hair colors, alternative lifestyles. I mean, these things have been around for a long time, but not in the quantity and not as they were even around and maybe even accepted, but now they're just promoted.
Yes.
I find that a very disturbing trend.
Yeah.
Um, and you don't want to, it's not cause and effect as simple as that, but even the shooter in Highland Park, which was about a mile from where I was,
Mm.
um,
Wow.
that look at this person, like,
Yeah.
it didn't take a shooting to realize that genuinely this person needed some help. I'm not smart enough to say what kind of help or how, but this person was not, um, normal from I guess our historical norms, and
Yeah.
that does concern me.
Yeah, they're called alternative and fringe lifestyles, countercultures, subcultures for a reason because they're not supposed to be the culture. I mean, that's a big part of it. And I come from a subculture,
Yep.
and when you come from a punk rock subculture, and then all of a sudden the mall has stores like Hot Topic, basically taking advantage of and exploiting your subculture, then it's gone. And as the band Crass sang, punk is dead. So that's a side rant. But let me real quick. I've seen a few mentions of this also in the comments. The woke corporations and woke capitalism. Is there a protection mechanism built in the way you see your business working to kind of keep some of that out?
I have to say, it is. I don't have a great solution to that. I think the solution I've come up with is I think that these businesses need to be held in private hands. Typically, if you're an entrepreneur, the thing that's been promoted over the past 20 years is, um, grow the business, take on some venture capital, big liquidity day, and I'm not necessarily a idea of public stocks.
Right.
It absolutely opens it up to then just taught, well, put away 10% of your paycheck into your 401k. The 401k goes to Vanguard or
Yeah.
goes to whoever, and then they control 40 and 40% each. Um,
Yeah.
and then they're going to do these ESG
Yeah.
stuff.
Yes.
Yeah, that's absolutely a concern to me. I think part of the solution is that we need to build businesses that actually earn a profit. So if you're an entrepreneur, you build a business and then you reap the benefits of that through actually making a profit, not building a business who then reaps the benefits from selling your before while you're still cash flow negative. Because that's what most of these companies are in the beginning, is they're investors are willing to pay a premium to get access to that equity. I think we ought to hold entrepreneurs accountable for making money themselves if they're going to make money.
Yes.
I don't know how to do that without force. I think it's obviously quite concerning, but I think it takes a mental. Um, we're going to have to change the way we think about the world mentally.
Yeah.
Um, so I don't have a great answer for you. I'm sorry to say, but
No.
it's something we think about.
Yeah, no worries. And for those listening, for more on that ESG stakeholder capitalism topic, the latest version of Counterflow with Tommy Salmons covers this. Andrew's asking, where did it go? Would you be allowing additional investors if they're good libertarians? Is there? I don't know if there's a way to kind of filter that or not.
Um, yeah, I mean, I would say that's how our company has sort of operated so far. Is when we raise capital, we've raised a little bit of money, and it's partially that the people most interested in our project are ideologically aligned, but we have on a couple of occasions decided not to really pursue certain routes and certain people and certain companies because we don't want to have a dilution to the message. And part of it is that we think a dilution of the message is a dilution of our business profits, because what's the point of being a free private city light? Go for the whole thing. We're not doing this to build a super special economic zone. That's not, do that. Let really efficient special economic zone people do that. So yeah, I think there's absolutely a role for entrepreneurs need to be very smart and cognizant about who they're taking on as investors, because once they take them on as investors, they have a seat at the table. And we've tried to be cognizant of that. I do think it's important that we do that in the future, and all people that start businesses like that ought to be aware of that. Not have people that are going to promote these entirely counterproductive narratives
Hmm.
behind the scenes.
Yes, I agree. Would you say the perfect example of a woke left wing version of the free private city was Chaz?
I don't know what they were. I mean, I think that's about how well a left free private city would go.
Yeah, me too.
Planting seeds on like a half inch of dirt
Yeah.
sprouted by tomorrow. That feels about right. But yeah, they were a mess, and I don't think we'd like not to be a them. Although I wish them success.
Yeah, more power to you out there in Seattle. Alex, I got to respect your time. Plus, I have to eat pretty soon here. But I'd like to give you the floor here as we close, and anything that you'd like to touch upon that we haven't hit upon, or just your sales pitch for this, anything you'd like, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me on. Look, I don't have a full on sales pitch necessarily. The idea is that there's a way that we can structure uh, governance that doesn't have to come with the coercion and the top down tyranny that we currently live under, and we're trying to do that in the world. Am I guaranteeing that we'll see success and that this is the way forward? I'm not. But I do think it's an idea worth trying. And to that, I would ask that, I think one of the things in the U.S. that's lacking is this narrative of alternative governance, somewhat lighter than it is elsewhere in the world. And so, it's really my goal, and I'd appreciate any support we can get from you, Buck, and the rest of the audience to promote these types of ideas. You don't necessarily have to be willing to pick up and leave, but maybe by sharing a message or investing or making an introduction to someone who might invest, those types of things can be very helpful. We're not currently looking for investment. This is certainly not an investment pitch. Potentially that will happen in the future. So if there is an interest on anyone's part, please do get in touch with me, and we'll talk about it. But I think keep your eye on these types of projects, and we'll see what we can do. I think I intimated this to you, Buck, but I hope in the next couple of months we have a very big announcement from another project in a different state. It's not in Honduras. It's not even the same continent. So it
Mm.
presents an entire, a case study for these types of things. And we'll share that. It's at freeprivatecities.com. You'll be able to learn any information. Tipolis has a little bit of light information. We won't. For now, it'll come through the Free Private Cities Foundation, and so please do follow there if you're interested in following along with new types of governance.
Is there any other plugs you can give besides the free private cities?
I think that's the one for now, and certainly you can check me out on Twitter. 12. It's my personal Twitter, although it's based
Say it.
on and you
Say
like it.
say it one more time, Alex. You cut out just as you announced your Twitter handle.
Sure. AD Voss 12. And that's
Awesome.
my personal Twitter. It'll promotes all kinds of free private city but in general, same type of messages that you would see from you'll see that there.
Excellent. Well, don't go anywhere, Alex. But for everyone listening and watching, we are going to get out of here. And thank you guys for being a part of Counterflow Live. Thank you, Alex.
Thank you very much for having me.
Yes.